Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants Hangout. My name is Joe Grabowski, and I'll be your host for today. For those just tuning in for the first time, Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants is all about bringing science, adventure, exploration, and conservation live into classrooms across North America and beyond. And our theme for this month is ocean plastics. So many of you may know some of the statistics. Up to 8 million tons of plastic enter our ocean each year. That's equivalent to about a dump truck worth of plastic every minute. So it is a big problem, and it is a global problem. So all month long, we've been talking to scientists, explorers, conservationists, and artists who have been working to highlight the issue and bring it to the attention of the public, and also working on solutions for how to limit our use of single-use plastics and such. So I'm really excited today to have our guest joining us, Erin Simon. Erin is the Director of Sustainability and Development at the World Wildlife Fund. She's interested in how the materials we use for packaging, like plastic, impact our environment and what we can do to help minimize those impacts. So at WWF, she works to protect the Earth's natural resources by staying up to date with new technologies that can make materials more Earth-friendly. Then she works with different companies to help them utilize and implement some of those materials. So Erin, it's so great to have you joining us live today. We've got a great group of classrooms from Canada and the US joining us, and we're looking forward to learning with you today.
Thanks so much. Ready for me to share, or are we going to do?
No, let's go for it.
All right, excellent. All right, let me bring up my presentation here, guys. All righty. Well, I'm so excited to be here with you guys, and thank you for taking the time out of your busy days to listen to me share a little bit about my work. Like Joe mentioned, I'm at World Wildlife Fund here in the U.S., and I lead up a lot of work on research and development, focused on helping to take all of that complicated science that is out there and translating it in a way that we can apply it to doing stuff to solve these big global issues. And one of the big issues that I have been tasked with helping us to figure out how to solve is this problem of plastic that's ending up in nature. I thought I would start today by telling you just a little bit about myself and how I came to this job at World Wildlife Fund. It wasn't a path that, when I was your age, I knew I was going to take, and so I feel like it's sort of an interesting story. I grew up in Michigan and went to school there, and in trying to figure out what I wanted to do, ended up at Michigan State University, and with not a lot of an idea of who I wanted to be when I grew up, but I got into engineering, into material science and packaging, and really loved that, and got a degree in packaging engineering, and from there went to Hewlett-Packard. I don't know if you guys recognize who Hewlett-Packard is, but they make computers and printers. And I spent 10 years with Hewlett-Packard doing design and procurement, which is buying materials and testing a lot of products to make sure that those materials were doing what we needed them to do in that system, right? In the system of packaging and protecting printers and computers so that they could travel all over the world and get into your homes. And so I spent a lot of time all over the world testing these products and traveling a lot and learning a lot. And in the last half of my 10 years there, I started to focus on these materials and in the environment and what role companies have to play to make sure that they are making good choices and responsible choices about how they use those materials. And as I was doing that work, I got to know this organization called World Wildlife Fund, represented by the adorable panda, and really started to evolve my thinking on the power that companies have to drive change. And so I was then hired by World Wildlife Fund about 8 years ago to lead up how we teach companies what to do, how we help them to make better decisions, because they take a lot of resources from our planet and they sell that product to everyone in the world. And so there's a responsibility that comes along with doing that in a really responsible way. And so on my team right now, I have a whole bunch of different types of scientists who do not just material science and packaging, but look at the things we grow, the water sheds we impact, and the climate systems that these companies have an impact on, always trying to look at the science that exists and helping companies to figure out what role they have to play and how they can make an impact. So on this issue of plastic waste, I spend the most of my time. It has, in the last 5 years, swiftly ramped up, and there is momentum everywhere around how we are going to not only tackle this issue, but also understand it better. And that's obviously, if you think about the role we play that I just described, like understanding the issue and understanding the best ways that we can drive change to solve for this issue is a huge role that WWF likes to play in this space, making sure that we are using the best known science to date and trying to apply it to all the right people who have a role to play. So as Joe highlighted, this is a massive issue today, right? We have 8 million tons of plastic trash entering the ocean every year. That's just unfathomable, really. And it has become clearer and clearer that if we don't stop immediately, if we don't turn off what we call this tap of plastic that's just flowing into the ocean, in the coming decades, there will be more plastic than fish in the ocean. And we depend on our oceans for our climate systems, for the air we breathe, for a lot of the protein we consume on the planet. And so we want to keep our oceans healthy because they're really important to us. And so having plastic flowing into them is just not a viable solution for a future that we want to see and that we want our children's children to see. And so the key aspect of this that really touches home with folks, and that I think most of you have probably heard about, is the impact this has on species, right? We know that today over 800 types of species have come in contact with plastic. They could be entangled in it, like this poor sea turtle. They could have eaten it because they confused it for food, or their food was growing on the plastic. Or it could have got caught up in their ecosystem and changed where their habitat in a way that makes it so they can't live there any longer. And all of those interactions are bad, right? We don't want that to happen. It doesn't belong here. And so you ask yourself, how does this happen? How do we get to a point where we have so much plastic entering our ecosystems? And a great study was done back in 2015 by a scientist by the name of Jenna Jembeck. And she asked this question. She said, why is it there? And, I think there can be a lot of theories, but what was really eye-opening about this piece of research was that it said, we have forgotten part of the system. When you guys think about this circular system of we take something from the planet, we make it into something, we use it, and then that's where we stopped, really. We have to get it back and recycle it and make it into more. And we sort of missed trying to solve for the back end of that system. And so what that science said was that we have limited and lacking waste management globally, and and that's especially prevalent in areas of the world where they've had lower economies, smaller economies, and they have booming populations that are now getting access to more stuff. And so when I look at this picture, I think to myself about the disproportionate way we have innovated materials. We have made all kinds of amazing plastics that bring value to our lives in not just food packaging, but medical packaging and construction and electronics and apparel and cars and airplanes. But what we haven't done is we haven't invested and we haven't innovated in the area of what to do with them when we're done with them, so we can keep getting that value back. And just to give you a little perspective on this, in the last 15 years, half of the plastics ever made were produced. And so this issue has just sort of really quickly ramped up and it's hit ahead, and so we feel like it's really super important that we get out ahead of it. And what's really fascinating is when you look in these coastal communities where this issue is a really big problem, you're looking at communities that are facing what we call other socioeconomic challenges. They may struggle to put food on their table or to have a roof over their head, or or to make sure that their children can go to school. And when you're facing all of those challenges at once, it's really hard for you to ask those communities to prioritize waste. And so we have to be really conscious about these, how we're going to help enable solutions and help to solve for this problem when there are a lot of things that are going on in these places that are impacted the most. From a conservation perspective, when you have a lot of waste that is accumulating, not only does it impact those communities by its presence and the fact that it creates, sometimes an unhealthy environment from a water and soil and air perspective, but you can imagine the fish that are supposed to be living in this water their ecosystems are sort of being choked, and so the fish stocks are decreasing, meaning the number of fish are going down. And so these communities are often, these coastal communities make up the majority of our fishermen in the world. And they depend on those fishing stocks for both their livelihood and their food, and so you can imagine how devastating this is for them. But what's been so interesting about this issue is that globally, across all these different cultures and across all these different perspectives, we all have the same reaction to a photo like this. We all say it just doesn't belong there. Plastic does not belong in nature. And so the first reaction that we often have is, well, let's get rid of it. We need to get rid of plastic. Plastic is bad. And the reality is that that's not totally the case. Plastic actually has environmental value. Today, plastic is a big part of why we decrease food waste, because it extends shelf life. And what that means is that by wrapping food in plastic, you allow it to last that long distance we decided to ship it, and to last on the retail shelf in the store for longer, because we shop less frequently, and it can last longer in our refrigerator. And it doesn't go to waste, because that food waste itself comes at an environmental cost. It lightweights our vehicles and our airplanes, which means they have lower emissions from a climate perspective. And so what we're challenged with, right, is this material that is clearly wreaking havoc on our planet, but it's also bringing a great deal of value to humanity. And so how do you address that intersection? And that's where an organization like World Wildlife comes in. We really look at problems in a holistic nature, and that's because at the heart of our mission, right, at the heart of what we're trying to do is conserving the planet's resources for both people and species in the future. And so the heart of that is this wildlife work. But you can't protect species if you don't protect their ecosystems, if you don't protect where they live and what they depend on. And so that's your forests, your oceans, your freshwater ecosystems. And then, of course, you've got these systems that we as humans depend on, the food and climate systems that are interacting within all of that. And so when we are looking at a large global problem like plastic waste, what we don't want to do is exchange one crisis for the other, right? Like, we don't want to address plastic waste in such a way that we have much higher emissions, or we are asking for much more from our forests, or have much, we lose a lot more food, and so we have a higher environmental cost from that perspective. And so WWF looked at the problem of plastic waste and said, we need to have a really holistic strategy. We need to have one that's not going to assume that that one thing is going to solve this problem, and it's going to be a sort of suite of solutions. And so last year, we came out with our strategy, and we said the vision of our strategy was to get to no plastics in nature by 2030. Meaning, we don't want any more plastics going into nature. It doesn't do good things when it's there, and it also represents waste. It represents a loss of resources that we took at the planet in the first place at a cost, right? Every time we cut down a tree or we mine for a mineral, that costs our planet something, right? It comes at an environmental cost. And so if we just take it and then make it into something else and just throw it away when we're done with it, that's just not really being good stewards of those resources. So wouldn't it be great if we could create a system that anything we took from the planet, we could keep in that technical system and reuse it over and over again? Then not having to go back to the planet to ask for more every time, and also getting that great added benefit of not having it end up in nature where we don't want it. And so that strategy is set up, and it looks at 4 key pillars, four key groups of people that we really need to engage on this in a positive way. First of all, the cities, and those are the cities on the front lines of this issue. This is in Southeast Asia, Philippines, Indonesia, China, Thailand. These are communities that, as you saw in those photos, are facing a lot of issues, and they need help. But they also need to be empowered, and they need to be helping. It's really important that you don't go into a place and tell them how to do something, that they sort of do it for themselves, and that you provide the expertise and funding to support them. And so the city's work out of WWF, because we are located in over 90 countries, is to help those communities come together with the right experts and the right funding sources to make sure they can help to enable better infrastructure and waste management. There is policy that's really important. As you can imagine, and you've probably heard of or seen, there's a lot of laws and legislation around waste and materials, and there are going to be more and more that come. And so we want to make sure that policy enables sensible solutions, and that it helps to foster the value of those materials so people want to collect them and want to make them into something else and buy them again. And so there's a lot of great work that we're focusing on the policy. And then, of course, there's the public. Working with the public is really important. Sharing this information with folks like you and with others so that they have that more knowledge, and that knowledge allows them to make better decisions in their lives, so that they understand the implications of their choices, of their purchasing decisions, of their power through voting. And so helping them to see, how complex this issue is, but how much hope and how much potential there is for us to solve it. And the last piece is working with companies. And as I mentioned before, this is sort of the work that I do. It's where we help companies to figure out the role they have to play. And they have a really unique role in this one, in that they can help not only in rethinking the way they use the materials in the first place, but also being, influencing and supportive of where those products are ending up, right? And so making sure that any products that they are selling into Southeast Asia matches the infrastructure, right, that they have there. So if they have a recycling facility, making sure that the products are packaged in materials that can be recycled there. They also have the ability to influence policymakers and make sure that that the policy is incentivizing that change and helping us to fund those important sort of infrastructure and processes that every city needs. And of course, they can talk to you guys. They can talk about the choices they're making. They can help consumers understand why their products could be better or not. And so we do a lot of work with them, helping them to do that, helping them to connect them to the work on the ground in these cities, and making sure that year over year they're making progress. Because for us, all four of these pillars are essential for us getting to that no plastics in nature by 2030. So I thought I'd share with you two recent trips I took, because these showing you slides with words on them are a whole lot less exciting. But I've been on a couple trips lately where I help to play that role that WWF likes to play, which is we help share what we know with others so that they can reach their potential. At the end of the day, World Wildlife Fund is not going to solve this on our own. We need everybody to be engaged. And so the more I can share what I know with you, and you can take that and do something with that, the better. And so back in April, I went on this expedition. It was called the Ocean Plastic Leadership Conference. And the idea was they were going to take a whole bunch of CEOs of plastic producers, a bunch of experts in the field and environmental NGOs, and trap us on a ship for 4 days in the middle of the North Atlantic Gyre. And I don't know if you guys know what gyres are, but the North Atlantic Gyre is off the east coast of North America. And a gyre is a place where a whole bunch of streams come together, and they sort of create an area in the middle where stuff can collect, where it kind of gets eddied in the middle there. And what often happens in these gyres is that trash or stuff that's floating on the surface collects. And so the North Atlantic Gyre is one of those such places. And so we hopped on this ship, and we went into the North Atlantic with the goal to break down barriers, to say, why haven't we solved this problem? What are the things we can be doing? Let's really workshop through what is happening. And while we were out there, anytime we came on a patch of sargassum grass, which is this orange grass that you see in the photo, and that's just like floating seaweed, then we would stop the ship. We would put on our bathing suits, hop in to the Zodiacs, and jump into 9,000 feet of water to clean the trash out of this sargassum grass. And so in this picture up above here, you can see what we collected. It's a pretty amazing set of treasure. There's a pop bottle, there's a part of a lawn chair, there's a shoe, there's a lot of crates, there is a toilet seat. So tons of stuff that we were able to pull out of these jars. And it really, I think what that did, it really anchored the issue with the people on board. It brought to the surface the urgency and the need for action. And when you have CEOs of chemical companies and plastic producers, and you have them in there and you have them looking at the problem, it's much easier to get them to say, yeah, I have a role to play, and I'm going to do something to solve it. We also spent a bit of time on the beach where that sargassum grass would wash up. And you can see here the size of the trash that we're picking up is a lot different, right? This is where that plastic has been in the ocean for a lot longer and it's broken down. It's called microplastics. And you just roll back that sargassum grass and you can just pick. It's like confetti. There's so much plastic in there, and you can imagine how easy it is for fish and birds to mistake that and eat it. And so as we spent these 4 days on what looks like a large vessel but felt very small after being trapped on it for that long, we really started to workshop through what the problems were and where the opportunity was. And you saw companies willing to make shifts. I'm standing in this picture with people from Burt's Bees, from Kimberly-Clark, that's a tissue company, from Hasbro, the toy company, and a student from Stanford. And we are saying, okay, what if there were certain situations where we could get rid of packaging altogether, and what would that look like, and who would we need to engage, and how would we bring that together? And so these events like this expedition really allows us to bring all the right players together, and it really showcased on this larger scale how this ocean plastic issue is not one where one of these parties can do it on our own. And this work is continuing on. Any work that started on this ship will continue on, and it was really meaningful. So that's a great example of some of the work that I do in the field with companies, is to take them where the problem is very obvious, and that helps to spark some interest and energy around solving it. Another trip I went on this summer was not with companies, but was with travelers. Because traveling is another way that people experience the world and actually encounter, they have this challenge of how they manage all of the waste that they're carrying with them. And so there's this organization called Natural Habitat, which does eco tours all over the world. And they like to take their guests to these really precious ecosystems and to showcase the beauty and power of the biodiversity that exists there, so that those people can go home and take, and continue to push for the belief in protecting those areas and saving those species and those ecosystems. And the remit of this trip to Yellowstone this summer was to do it zero waste. And that was a pretty high bar, a pretty extreme example where we would literally carry our trash with us everywhere, and we would measure it all at the end and see how well we did as a group of 12 people traveling all through Yellowstone National Park. And it was an exciting trip where everybody learned lessons, including myself, as the resident expertise on materials and waste, there to help people get through this experience and understand it. And at the end of the day, what we did was, our goal was to have only enough trash to fit in one mason jar for the entire week, which is the mason jar you see in this picture. We composted over 28 pounds of food waste. And we diverted from landfill through recycling and TerraCycling about 23 pounds. And overall, that was our waste right there for 12 people over 7 days, which was very impressive. And we did that because we avoided trash. We brought our own water bottles and our own cutlery and our own napkins and utilized those, and we shared meals to reduce our food waste. And we brought bulk snacks, and and we worked with the hotels and the restaurants to make sure we didn't use any single-use plastics. And it was a really powerful trip because at the end of the day, these travelers who were just like you guys, they didn't come into this with an expertise in this, but they knew they wanted to be a part of the change. And so they had this experience, and at the end of it, where we had all these conversations about what was difficult, what was empowering, they all had conversations with me at the end about what they could do when they went home to their communities. What was the call to action that they could take home and do, how could they implement a better recycling program? How could they share with their communities better reusable materials in their in whether it's in their gyms or in their schools or in their golf clubs. And it was really great because, again, it's not about understanding the value of these issues and how they impact these precious ecosystems is super important, but it's about feeling the ability to be a part of that solution that has been amazing with this plastic waste issue. We saw it with the straw, that everybody was willing to just give up the straw because that was the thing that they could touch down and do today and feel empowered about. And so I think that today people are asking, what's next? What can I do that is more to help solve this really devastating issue? And so I'm going to leave you guys, before we go to questions, with what I think you guys can do, because everyone has a role to play, right? So we can be good stewards by reuse to begin with, right? Bringing your own water bottles, asking your parents to bring their own coffee mugs, stopping using disposable straws and use a reusable one if you really want to, bringing reusable grocery bags and also reusable containers for takeout when you go to restaurants. And then also recycling in your homes, recycling in your classrooms, and asking the question to your parents as you're shopping, is that material recyclable? Can we look at the label? Have the conversation as much as possible, because everybody can do something here. All of those little steps count. And so even though it feels overwhelming when you see that beach full of plastic, I have great hope, because today everyone is engaged and everyone cares. And so we're going to be a part of that solution to getting us to no plastics in nature by 2030. So well, that is everything I have. I'm hoping we can have a good discussion and you guys can ask me some great questions, and we can go from there.
All right. Perfect, Erin. Thanks so much for sharing that with us today. And that looked like two really interesting expeditions with two very different groups of people, but very good outcomes from both of them. So very cool. I want to give a reminder to any classrooms who are tuning in on YouTube. Don't forget, you can use the chat sidebar on the right. Let us know where you're watching from. Send in some questions. And I'm going to give a shout out to Mrs. Preet's group, who's hanging out with us, the SDG Warriors in Bangalore in India. So thanks for joining us today. And also Mrs. McLean's group is hanging out with us in Kitchener, Ontario. So a big shout out to both of those groups. But let us meet one of our live classrooms. So I'm going to start off. We're going to go to, let's start in Mrs. Sims' class. She's got some grade 5 students hanging out with her in Newcastle, Ontario. Let's get that microphone turned on. How we doing, Newcastle? Oh, I think they're there. Mrs. Sims' class, give me a big wave if you can hear me. All right, we'll have to come back to Mrs. Sims' class. I can see they're there, but their microphone doesn't appear to be cooperating. So instead, we're going to go to Mrs. Deer's class. And they're joining us in Chesapeake, Virginia, some grade 7 students. Let's get that microphone turned on, see if they are there. How are we doing, Mrs. Deer's class?
Hi. What animals most impacted by the plastics?
I'm sorry, did you ask which animals are impacted by plastics?
Yes.
Yeah, so I would say there's a lot. So we've discovered that over 800 species have come in contact with them. And so we know that seabirds seem to be quite vulnerable, and we know that like about 99% of seabird species we have found have ingested plastic of some sort. So I think if anything that feeds around areas where that microplastic can be collected. We've seen a lot of sea turtles that are impacted because Plastic bags look a lot like jellyfish in the water, and so do plastic bottles, and so they eat them and then their bellies are full, and so sometimes they get really sick that way or starve to death. But a lot of different species, and none of them are good. And I imagine, to be honest, that there are species we don't even know have been impacted yet that we will continue to find out about. But that's a great question.
All right. And Erin, if I can ask you just to stop the screen share so we can get you back on the screen.
Yes, absolutely.
All right. Perfect. There we go.
Oh, sorry. I wasn't even in there.
Oh, yeah. No worries. Let's go now to Kitchener, Ontario. Mr. Shorts Group's joining us, some grade 5-6 students. Let's get that microphone turned on. How are we doing, 5-6s? All right, who's up?
How much does the plastic in the water infect our drinking water?
Oh, yeah. So that's a really good question. We don't have a great answer to, but we're trying to figure out, and here's why. There have been a number of studies that have looked at how much of this microplastic has broken down enough so that it gets into our drinking water. And so there are varying studies all over the world that give us sort of a wide range of amounts. And we're trying to figure that out. And so we don't have a great answer, but what we do know is that we are consuming some amount of plastic in our drinking water. We don't know how much, and we don't actually know if that impacts us, right? If it gets into our stomach and our body is absorbed at all, or if it just passes through. But science in the area of looking at microplastics and human consumption of them is really new. It's only about 3 or 4 years old. There's actually a fantastic scientist by the name of Dr. Chelsea Rockman at the University of Toronto, who is doing some of the leading work on this. And she has a lab called the Rockman Lab that is looking at this. And so we're really excited and are really supportive of building up that body of knowledge so that we can understand what's happening in order to determine what to do about it.
All right. Great question. We know Dr. Rockman, we hosted her last year for our ocean plastic events, and we're hosting one of her students, Rachel, on Monday as well.
Great. She's fantastic.
All right. I'm going to steal a question from online. I'm also going to give a shout out to another grade 4 class in London, Ontario. Mrs. Player's class is joining us. And so Mrs. McLean's class, they are in Kitchener, Ontario, and they're wondering, we've heard things about projects trying to clean up the surface of the ocean. Are there any projects maybe using robot technology to try and clean the plastic that sinks deeper in the ocean?
Those are good questions. So there's a couple of different things that are being focused on when we solve this problem. There are the people who are looking on cleaning up the mess that exists, and then the people who are focused on sort of turning off the tap, like I said. And we always say, when you have a leaky faucet, you need to turn the tap up before you can bring out the mop. And so I would say the majority of investment and time and resources is going into stopping the problem and solving the fact that our system's a bit broken. And then there are others that are looking at trying to clean up that surface plastic. Again, there is more focus on the surface and coastal cleanup than there is in deep water. And the reason for that is in coastal areas, it is more condensed because you have less water, right? So it's easier for you to get to it and collect it. It's also closer to where it came into the water, and so it's usually in a larger form and easier to collect. And that is also the places where you have a higher density of species. And so that's the place where we want to clean it up first. So that is one thing. And so there's not a ton of investment on cleaning up what's found on the bottom, but we do know that it's there. There is some great studies that are being done by National Geographic around different technologies that can help identify and use an algorithm to figure out what these plastics are and where they are. So they're testing a bunch of those methods, which I think will help us continue to understand what's down there more as we look at how we're going to address cleaning it up. But not as much investment in that area today.
All right, great question. Let's see. Let's visit Mrs. Hans's group. There are some grade 6, 7, and 8s joining us in Austin, Texas. Let's get their microphone turned on. How are we doing, Austin?
So I was wondering if, like, when you guys were cleaning the water, the trash in the water, if there's going to be like plastic under the sand, is there going to be like a future plastic detector under the water? So like we can detect plastic that's under all that dirt and like under the ocean.
Yeah. So sort of following on to the question that we just had, right, is how are we going to get all of that microplastic out of the water? And I think, like I said, there's not a ton of investment, but there's a lot of what's been happening in this space is a lot of invention and research happening in how do you tackle really tiny plastics, because we can't just sort of pick them up with a big net, right? It's very difficult to do that. And so I have seen some young entrepreneurs looking at different solutions that could pull the plastic out of the water, the microplastics out of the water. I have seen different filters that have been put in river openings near bays that can try to collect that plastic before it gets there. But there is a lot of opportunity in this whole space for invention to rethink how we solve these problems in the past. And I think that the opportunity is really large with this, with the microplastics and the toxins that we're talking about, because for the longest time, people have been using dilution as the solution to pollution, right? So what that means is anything we don't really like and don't want to see, we've just sort of poured into the ocean because we're like, there's a lot of water, it'll go away. But it's starting to build up, which is called bioaccumulation. And so there's this desire to sort of solve for not just plastics, but all of sort of those toxins we've been putting into the water. What can we do to reverse that? And so I think if any of you are scientists and entrepreneurs in the room, really there's a huge amount of opportunity for us to think about, like, what is the thing that could help us to clean that up? We don't have the answer yet, but there's a lot of excitement around trying to figure that out. So maybe one of you guys will have the award-winning idea on that one.
All right. It definitely seems like a lot of the students are thinking about it right now.
I know.
Grade 6 says Peterborough, Ontario, Mrs. Thompson's class. Let's get that microphone turned on. How are we doing, Peterborough?
Hi.
Hi, Joe. So my question is, how many different types of plastics are in the ocean at this minute?
Could you get closer to the microphone? I couldn't hear you. I'm so sorry.
Go straight up.
Right up to the
So how many different types of plastics are in the ocean at this minute?
How many different types? Whew, a lot. So let's think about this for a second, right? One of the amazing things about plastic is that it's super versatile and adaptable. And so we have, in material innovation, made millions of different versions of it. So there are some types that you look at the little arrows on the back, the 1 through 7 that you see on like a plastic bottle or a film or something like that. And those are sort of like the 7 most common, but there are so many more. And so I would say there is a lot of different types of plastic in the ocean, which actually makes it a little bit difficult to figure out which of those plastics are good and which are bad, or which have worse impacts or don't. Some of the research that Dr. Rockman is doing is actually on some of the impacts of the different types of plastics on different types of shellfish. So that's a great question. Another one that we don't really know the answer to. We do know how many different types we've made, which is many, and so I think you can assume that probably a sampling of all of them are in there.
All right, and we're going to go to Mrs. Woodland's group. Some high schoolers hanging out with us in Belleville, Ontario. Let's get that microphone turned on. There it is. How are we doing, Belleville?
Hi.
Hi.
Our question is, what inspired you to study plastics?
I'm sorry, can you pronounce the word again?
What inspired you to study plastics?
I don't know that I biogeodynamic plastic.
Oh, no. They're wondering what inspired you to study plastics.
I thought you were asking me for a new technology. I'm like, I don't know that one. Oh, that's a great question. So, I mean, I think I touched on this in telling you about myself, but when I got to college, I didn't really know what I wanted to study, and I have like a natural aptitude for math, and so I got like in my like math studies with TAing, and when somebody said you should go into material science and packaging, and so what I liked about it was that it was super practical. and that you could see solutions that you were developing in real life and how they were applied and how they bettered life. And so that's how I really got into packaging and started to do the work that I did through Hewlett Packard. But I also have this huge appreciation for the world that I live in and that I'm blessed with. And I love spending time outdoors. And I started to see the impact that these products that I was so passionate about helping to get made had on that planet. And so I felt like it was my responsibility to be a part of the solutions for that versus just kind of making stuff to sell. So that's kind of how I got there.
All right. Well, Erin, I'm going to throw a two-parter question from online. This is from two groups, one from Mrs. Player's group in London and one from our group joining us in India. And the first part is, if people know that throwing away plastic is a bad thing, why do you think they keep doing it? And then the second part to that is from our group in India, and they're wondering, of the different types of plastics in the research so far, is there one type that is really kind of rough on the environment? We should definitely avoid throwing that in the environment.
Yeah, okay, so on the first one, which the question was, why do we keep throwing it away if we know it's bad? So here's the reality, right? Like, you can have a really recyclable water bottle, which I don't have with me, and it can be 100% recyclable, meaning technically if it made it to a recycling facility, it can be recycled. But you may not have recycling infrastructure, so you just have trash, right? And so there are a lot of places around the world that we have really recyclable materials, but we don't have any place to put them. And so what are your choices? Your choices are to send it to a landfill or to litter it. So in this case, the environmentalist in me says, send it to the landfill until we can get recycling. And so it's really, what's really been tough with this issue is that you have materials that are advancing faster than the infrastructure that we need to manage them. And so we need to have both of those things progress. We need to have more progress in waste management. But it doesn't mean that, it doesn't mean we don't stop progress on either of those. One of the problems that this comes up a lot is in compostable materials. So I don't know how many of you have had a compostable cup or cutlery, but you find yourself throwing it in the trash because you don't have a composter to send it to, right? That material needs to go to an industrial composter in order to get actually composted. Going to the trash, going to a landfill means it just acts like any other fork or knife or cup. It doesn't break down. And so it feels sometimes futile. It feels frustrating to have this thing that seems like it's better, but not to have a way to manage it. And that's sort of the situation we're in today, right? Which is everything's not, like, it's not all lining up perfectly from a timing perspective. But my advice is, don't get frustrated by that. Continue to pursue those better options by looking forward to those solutions that you're going to have infrastructure in your area to use. And I think the first place you should always start with is, do you need it? If you don't need it, or you can use a reusable option for it, start there, because then you don't have to throw it away in the end. And then the second question, which was, which of those common plastics are the worst for the environment? And this is another one of those, we're trying to figure out all the impacts of plastics on the environment. But what we do know is PVC, which is one of the current plastics, that has a lot of negative impacts on humans producing it. And can be it has already has proven negative impacts. And so you already see some of that being phased out. And so PVC plastic is one that I would say has a great deal of science on human health. Another one that is being focused on is expanded polystyrene. And this one is, and that's not because the plastic itself is necessarily worse for the environment, but it is so lightweight that when it ends up in the environment, it often floats away. It's quick to break down because it's like that foam that you would put a printer or a computer in to protect it, or it's a styrofoam cup or a cooler. Those things break down easily, and they look like little white soft pellets that are often eaten. And so anything that breaks down quickly and is easy for animals to consume is never good. And so that's another material that you're seeing a bigger push to move out of from a single-use plastic perspective than others.
All right. Well, first of all, classrooms, thank you so much for hanging out with us today. As per usual, your questions were awesome. Erin, it's always great when we're able to steal a little bit of your time. You're doing some really great work with WWF, and we look forward to following along as you continue to do more of that work. And yeah, thanks so much for hanging out with our classrooms today and answering some questions.
Thank you so much for having me. It is really exciting to see how much interest there is in this issue, and I look forward to seeing what you guys all do in the future to help us to solve these big problems.
All right. And Erin, I know classrooms do have lots of questions. So if teachers send me some questions, are you okay if I send them your way if some more questions come?
Absolutely. Definitely.
All right. Excellent. Well, the last thing we'll do is I'll turn the microphone on, boys and girls. If you want to get a little bit loud and say a big goodbye and thank you to Erin, then we'll sign off for today. So here we go. Microphones are on. All right. Awesome work, boys and girls. Thanks again for hanging out today, and we will see you on the next Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.